Brent with the Minded Sport Institute, where our mission is to help athletes and professionals train their brains fit for peak performance and well-being. Today I'm very excited to share with you a new service that we're adding to our practice, and that is neurotherapy, also known as brain biofeedback. I think what's so powerful about neurotherapy, which we're going to learn about, is that it gives athletes and business professionals the ability and skill set to learn how to kind of train their brains into these psychological states where they perform at their best, whether it be overcoming sleep disturbance, problems focusing, maybe increasing creativity, or in the case of peak performance athletes, being totally focused on the task at hand and helping them kind of establish flow. So this is a quick article. It's just posted in 2006 in the Wall Street Journal. It talked about how Italy's World Cup winning soccer team actually trained in neurotherapy. And I know in this past Olympics, I think it was over 80% of the Canadian Olympic athletes that medaled were training in neurotherapy. In professional sports, a lot of athletes and teams and players consider it their secret weapon. So this is a short video from this past weekend that I took of me doing my first assessment. This is where so much of the power in neurotherapy comes, because it gives us the ability to assess our client's brainwave state prior to even saying a word to them. We don't need to know about their long drawn out process, how they're playing their sport, etc., etc. Whatever issues, we just measure the brainwave state and we know it from that. And that's where we kind of take charge in the therapeutic approach and really kind of deal with the underlying issue right from the start. Let me go back here. So this is measuring the frontal cortex. You can see the wires around the earlobes grounding the electrical signal. And this is doing a clinical cue. So it's measuring the theta, beta, delta amplitude on my first clients. This is just a screenshot of what it looks like. These are actually thresholds where I'm trying to train the brain. So this is showing, it's above this one, but it's below these thresholds. We'll get into that later on. So just talking very quickly and giving you a summary of the different brainwave states. So delta is the slow brainwave frequency, 1 to 3 hertz, which means cycles per second. It's very, it occurs during dreamless sleep, and kind of deep sleep. Theta, 4 to 8 hertz, is related to deep relaxation, meditation, and problem solving. Alpha, 9 to 14 hertz, it's related to relaxed, calm, creative visualization. And actually, in peak performing athletes, this is what a lot of times we work on increasing. And lastly, there's beta, 15 to 30 hertz. It's kind of the fastest cycles per second, and it's related to being, acutely aware, focused, and really problem-solving skills. So I'll talk very quickly about a few things here, and that's the clinical cue, which is the assessment, which I mentioned prior has so much potential in helping athletes because it gives us that baseline assessment of how the brain is firing. Secondly, I'm going to talk about neurofeedback and kind of brain driving, which is a heightened ability to help our athletes and clients train their brain. So these are just a few of the kind of benefits that neurotherapy has, and it's been proven to help in depression, it's been proven to help in addiction, PTSD, sleep disorders, headaches, OCD, and what I'm going to talk lastly about, which I think has so much potential for us in the sport industry, and that is dealing with head injuries and traumatic brain injuries. So a couple guidelines, principles about neurotherapy. It's not a standalone approach. So whatever your clinical psychotherapeutic approach is, whether it's CBT, depth psychology, or psychological skill training and sports psychology, it marries perfectly with your approach. Secondly, it's a bottom-up approach. So we're dealing with, again, the core issue, how the brain is firing, and we build our therapeutic approach from that. Lastly, it's data-driven. So everything that we're sharing right now, it's been researched, and it's been proven over the last 4 decades that neurotherapy helps in these approaches. So this is just a quick kind of summary of the clinical cue assessment. So when we do the clinical cue, we only measure actually 5 spots in the brain, and that gives us a plethora of information that helps us analyze how an athlete's brain is firing. But in this case of traumatic brain injury, we actually do a full 19 electrode analysis to get a full brain map. So quickly, I'm just going to talk about the difference between traditional neurofeedback and brain driving. So neurofeedback, this is how it looks. It's the operant conditioning, which you recognize from Skinner. And here, if we're working with a young athlete, we play a game with them where when their brain is firing in a peak state, the game of Pac-Man in front of them, the Pac-Man is going to move forward and it's going to eat the bits. But when their brain is not firing in a peak state, the Pac-Man is going to stay still. So again, that's that operant conditioning stimulus. As opposed to brain driving. Brain driving, which I've mentioned, is kind of that power accelerated approach. You know, it's actually just used as a supplement, and neurofeedback is always used to follow up and really do the deep training. But brain driving helps because it's the classical conditioning approach from, you remember, from Pavlov here. So I'm going to show you some images of brain driving to understand. So here we have some goggles, here we have some headphones, and here we kind of put all these approaches together to make a very effective brain driving technique. And how this works is, you see here we have a stimulant, we have the headphones, we have the goggles attached to the client. Here we're trying to increase alpha, like I mentioned, for peak performance. So when we have these electrodes and they are stimulated at this acupuncture point, which increases alpha. So when the client first starts, it's stimulating them, and then once they reach that alpha state, the stimulation of the acupuncture stops, and the goggles then start to fire with a light that's behind them, and it helps grab that alpha state. So it helps train the threshold it's entrainment. And eventually we increase the threshold higher and higher so the athlete learns to, you know, kind of develop that state more and more. And it's really cool, you know, with brain driving, we can attach the brainwave states to things like choo-choo train, and when your brain's firing at a peak state, the train moves. This is me doing it on my first client this weekend. So what I want to touch upon is the importance of neurofeedback in dealing with traumatic brain injuries. I think this is a huge potential in our industry, and I think it's something that we really need to focus and pay attention to. And why that is because we know that, you know, this is every parent's worst nightmare, seeing their child on the field with concussion. So this again is where we do the full brain map, and here we see this child doing his brain map. And why it's effective is because unfortunately a lot of children are diagnosed with ADHD as opposed to traumatic brain injury, and they're misdiagnosed, and as a result they're put on medication and they're put on different psychotherapeutic approaches which never deal with the root issue, which the clinical Q assessment would have pointed out, which is the traumatic brain injury. And what results from traumatic brain injury is a predisposition to addiction, to violence. You know, one study showed that people in incarceration, 100% on death row, had traumatic brain injury. So if we find athletes and are able to do this assessment at a young age, we can save so much hardship as well as increase performance. You know, maybe Aaron Hernandez was a perfect example of that. So again, I want to really thank you for your time, and I hope you learned a little bit about neurotherapy or brain biofeedback. I'm going to attach a bunch of articles and all the resources to the information I've shared below, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you again.